They stood at the podium and they lied to you. Not with malice, perhaps, but with the terrified certainty of bureaucrats who are staring at the unknown and desperately trying to wrestle it into a box labeled familiar. On the 19th of November, 2025, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration held a press conference in Greenbelt, Maryland. The room was packed. The world was watching. For 6 weeks, the government had been silent, hiding behind the legal shield of a shutdown, sitting on data that could change the course of human history. And when Associate Administrator Nicola Fox finally stepped up to the microphone, she did not offer wonder. She did not offer curiosity. She offered a sedative. "We certainly haven't seen anything that would lead us to believe it is anything other than a comet," she said. "Case closed. Go back to sleep. It is just a rock. It is just ice. Do not look at the anomalies. Do not ask about the timing. Do not ask why we hid the images for 42 days. I am AVI LOEB, and I am telling you that case closed is the language of cowards. It is the language of a scientific community that has lost the ability to dream. To understand the magnitude of the deception we witnessed in that press conference, we must strip away the official narrative and look at the raw data. We must look at the timeline, because when you line up the facts, they do not paint a picture of a random cosmic accident. They paint a picture of intent. Let us go back to the beginning. To July 1st of this year, an automated telescope system in Chile, the Atlas survey, flagged an object moving through the dark. The computers immediately knew something was wrong. This object was not orbiting our sun. It was moving too fast. It was unbound. It was on a hyperbolic trajectory, screaming through the void from another star system. This alone should have stopped the presses. We have only seen 2 interstellar visitors before this. Oumuamua in 2017, which tumbled and accelerated like a discarded piece of technology, and Borisov in 2019, which behaved exactly like a boring natural comet. Now we have the 3rd visitor, 3I Atlas. But almost immediately the coincidences began to pile up. A trajectory analyst ran the numbers backward. He calculated the speed and the path to determine when this object entered our solar system. The answer was approximately 8,000 years ago. Pause and think about that number. 8,000 years. That is the exact moment in human history when we woke up. That is the dawn of recorded civilization. That is when we invented writing. That is when we started carving our stories into stone and clay. Is it not a convenient coincidence that an interstellar probe just happened to arrive at the exact moment the local species developed the ability to document its arrival? If you were sending a scout to check on the progress of a primitive civilization, that is exactly when you would schedule the flyby. But the establishment calls this random. They call it a fluke. Then I started looking at the orbital parameters, and what I found made the hair on the back of my arms stand up. Space is 3-dimensional. It is a vast, chaotic void. Objects can approach our solar system from any direction, from above the galactic plane, from below, from any random angle. The odds of an object lining up with the specific plane where our planets orbit are astronomically low. It is like throwing a dart from a mile away and hitting the thin wire separating the sections of the board. 3I Atlas is inclined only about 5 degrees from the ecliptic plane. It is hugging the planetary disk. It is surfing the very specific, very narrow corridor where all the interesting stuff in this solar system lives. Why would a random rock do that? And then, look at the path itself. If I were a tour guide showing you the highlights of the inner solar system, I would take you to Mars, then Venus, then Earth. That is exactly the path 3I Atlas took. It performed a sightseeing tour of the rocky planets. It did not just pass by, it passed at distances that were perfect for observation, close enough to get high-resolution data, but not close enough to trigger a gravitational capture or a collision. I calculated the odds of this. The likelihood of a random interstellar object passing so close to Mars, then Venus, then Earth, in that specific sequence while also arriving at the perfect moment in human history, is less than 1 in 100,000. 1 in 100,000. If you went to a casino and the dealer rolled the same number 5 times in a row, you would not call it nature. You would call the pit boss. You would say the game is rigged. But when the universe rolls the dice and gives us a sequence of events that screams artificial design, NASA shrugs and says, "It is just a comet. This is not science. This is dogma." And the dogma was protected by silence. On October 2nd, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, one of our most powerful eyes in the sky, turned its high-rise camera toward the object. It was 19 million miles away, a stone's throw in cosmic terms. The Chinese Tianwen-1 orbiter also took images. We had a front-row seat. We had the truth on a hard drive. But on October 1st, the day before those images were taken, the United States government shut down. For 6 weeks, 6 critical weeks, NASA was legally gagged. The public relations offices were closed. The data release pipelines were frozen. The object was performing its most critical maneuvers, approaching its closest point to the sun, and the premier space agency on Earth went dark. Was this a conspiracy? I do not know. I am a physicist, not a politician. But I know that ignorance is a breeding ground for control. By the time the government reopened, by the time the press conference was held on the 19th of November, the narrative had been solidified. They had 6 weeks to look at the data, to realize it did not fit their models, and to decide how to spin it. And the spin was clumsy. They told us that the object is a comet. They told us that the water and carbon dioxide ratios, which are completely unlike any comet we have ever seen, are just unusual. They told us that the anti-tail, a tail pointing toward the sun, defying the pressure of the solar wind, was a trick of perspective. They are asking you to believe that a random rock from deep space managed to thread the needle of our solar system, line up with our planets, arrive at the dawn of our history, and exhibit physics-defying structures, all by accident. I went on the news immediately after their conference. I told the world that my colleagues who claim to know for certain that this is a comet are not being true scientists. They are abandoning curiosity for comfort. To assert case closed when the data is this anomalous is an act of intellectual arrogance. They want you to look at the fuzzy white dot they finally released, an image that looks like a snowball in a blizzard, and be satisfied. But they are ignoring the structures that amateur astronomers saw when NASA was sleeping. They are ignoring the fragmentation that was not a fragmentation. They are ignoring the fact that this object survived a close pass to the sun that should have vaporized a natural comet of its size. We are dealing with an object that breaks the rules. And when an object breaks the rules, you do not rewrite the rulebook to make it boring. You accept that you might be playing a new game. Let us descend into the specific mechanics of this anomaly, because this is where the official narrative begins to crumble under the weight of its own contradictions. The scientific establishment wants you to believe that 3I Atlas is a comet. They want you to look at the fuzzy white dot in their press release and nod your head. But when we strip away the press statements and look at the raw orbital mechanics, we find ourselves staring at a set of coincidences so unlikely that they border on the miraculous. Consider the path this object took. In our solar system, we have a specific plane where the planets live. We call it the ecliptic. It is a flat disk. Comets and rogue objects from deep space usually come at us from random angles, from above, from below, diving in steeply and leaving just as fast. They are chaotic visitors. But 3I Atlas? It slid into our system almost perfectly parallel to our own planetary disk. Its inclination is a mere 5 degrees. It did not just pass through our neighborhood, it merged into our traffic lane. And once it was in that lane, it executed a maneuver that looked suspiciously like a grand tour. It passed Mars. Then it passed Venus. Then it passed Earth. It visited the 3 rocky, potentially habitable worlds in our system, one after another, at distances that were safe but perfect for scanning. I calculated the probability of this. If you throw a rock into a crowded room, the odds of it hitting 3 specific people in a perfect line, while also matching the height of the floor they are standing on, are infinitesimal. I stated this publicly. Mother Nature was kinder to NASA than expected from a random delivery of rocks by at least a factor of 100,000. 1 in 100,000. Those are the odds we are asked to accept as natural. But the strangeness does not end with the orbit. It gets worse when we look at the physical behavior of the object during its closest approach to the Sun, its perihelion. On the 29th of October, 3I Atlas plunged toward our star. This is the moment of truth for any comet. The heat is intense. The gravitational tidal forces are immense. A dirty snowball usually begins to scream in agony at this point, sublimating massive amounts of gas, cracking, and often disintegrating. And for a moment, that is what we thought we saw. Amateur astronomers reported that the object brightened by a factor of 100 virtually overnight. This is extreme, even for a comet. Then, the images seemed to show fragmentation. One observer counted 16 distinct pieces. The headline should have been, "Comet disintegrates near Sun." But it did not disintegrate. This is the Schrödinger's cat of comets. It appeared to explode, shedding massive amounts of material. Estimates suggest it lost 13% of its total mass in a matter of days, and yet, when the dust cleared, the nucleus was still there. It was intact. It survived a mass loss event that should have turned a natural object into a cloud of gravel. How do you explain an object that sheds its skin but keeps its body? Unless, of course, what we witnessed was not a fragmentation, but a deployment. Unless the pieces we saw were not broken rock, but subprobes released near the star for maximum energy absorption. Or perhaps we were witnessing the shedding of a protective layer, a heat shield designed to ablate during the perihelion passage. And then, there is the matter of the tail. If you know anything about comets, you know that the tail always points away from the Sun. The solar wind is a stream of charged particles that blows the gas and dust outward, like a flag blowing in the wind. Physics dictates this. 3I Atlas developed an anti-tail. It grew a tail that pointed directly toward the Sun. The skeptics at NASA call this a perspective effect, an optical illusion caused by the angle of observation. They wave their hands and say, "Nothing to see here." But look at the data from the astronomers who were actually tracking it. We saw tightly collimated jets. These were not the messy, spraying fountains of a melting ice ball. These were focused beams of material. One jet extended 620,000 miles toward the Sun. Another extended nearly 2 million miles away from it. Nature is messy. Nature makes clouds. Nature does not make straight lines that stretch for 1,000,000 miles against the flow of the solar wind. A focused jet pointing toward the Sun is not a tail. It acts like a thruster. If you are trying to counteract the gravitational pull of a star, if you are trying to maintain a stable orbit or correct your trajectory, you fire your engine toward the gravity well. To the uninitiated eye, a rocket plume looks like a comet tail, but the vector tells the true story, and we cannot ignore the composition. On the 24th of October, radio telescopes in South Africa picked up a signal. They detected hydroxyl emissions. This indicates the presence of water being broken down by sunlight. Now, comets have water. That is not new, but the ratio of carbon dioxide to water on 3I Atlas is completely off the charts compared to local comets. It is carbon-rich. It is water-poor, yet emitting distinct bursts of water signature exactly when it needs to maneuver. If I were designing a bipropellant propulsion system for an interstellar probe, water and carbon-based fuels are exactly what I would harvest and use. The establishment looks at these chemicals and sees a strange recipe from a different star system. I look at them and I see fuel. The disconnect between the data and the official explanation reached its peak with the Mars images. Remember, we had the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, the Perseverance rover, the MAVEN spacecraft, the Chinese Tianwen-1, and solar observatories like Stereo and Punch all watching this thing. NASA has the greatest imaging technology in human history. They can read a license plate from orbit, and yet, the definitive image they released to the public was a fuzzy white ball. Why is the resolution so poor? Why does the image look like it was taken by a security camera in the 1990s? There are two possibilities. The first is incompetence, that despite billions of dollars of hardware, they simply missed the focus. The second possibility is that the high-resolution images show something that they cannot explain, and therefore, they cannot show. If the high-resolution images showed a craggy, irregular rock, they would have released them immediately to silence people like me. Look, Avi, it is a potato. Be quiet. The fact that they showed us a blur suggests that the sharp image does not look like a potato. It suggests that the sharp image might show smooth edges. It might show symmetry. It might show a shape that geology does not produce. We are left with a puzzle where the pieces do not fit the picture on the box. We have an object that arrives on an impossible trajectory, tours our habitable planets, survives a catastrophic explosion, emits focused jets against the solar wind, and hides behind a wall of government silence and low-resolution photos. They tell us it is natural. But every single anomaly I have listed, the inclination, the survival, the anti-tail, the jets, requires a separate, increasingly complex excuse to explain it away. At what point do the excuses stop? At what point do we apply Occam's razor and admit that the simplest explanation for an object that acts like a probe is that it is a probe? The data is screaming at us, and the silence from the experts is the loudest sound in the room. We are living through a crisis of imagination. The scientific community is desperate to fit the square peg of 3I Atlas into the round hole of cometary physics because they are terrified of the alternative. Because if they admit that the peg does not fit, they must admit that the hole they have dug for themselves, the rigid, dogmatic belief that we are alone in this universe, is too shallow to contain the truth. Let us conduct a thought experiment. Let us assume for a moment that we are not the smartest entities in the universe. Let us assume that a civilization arose 1 billion years before the first microbe swam in the primordial soup of Earth. What would their technology look like to us? Arthur C. Clarke famously said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I would propose a corollary. Any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial surveillance is indistinguishable from nature, to the untrained eye. If you wanted to send a probe to a star system to study a primitive civilization that has just discovered nuclear weapons and radio waves, you would not build a gleaming saucer with flashing lights. That is Hollywood. That is primitive. You would build something rugged. You would build something that can survive the harsh radiation of interstellar space for millions of years. You would cloak it. You would make it look like a rock. You would design it to follow a path that looks natural at first glance, but upon closer inspection reveals a calculated itinerary. A path that takes it past the habitable worlds, Mars, Venus, Earth. You would time its arrival to coincide with the technological awakening of the species you are observing. And when you needed to refuel or when you needed to brake, you would use the natural resources of the star itself. You would dip into the solar wind. You would release a magnetic sail. To a distant observer, this deployment of a sail would look like a sudden brightening. The exhaust from your maneuvering thrusters would look like a tail. But unlike a comet, which is a slave to the gravity of the star, your probe would maintain stability. It would keep its sensors locked on the target. This is exactly what we are seeing with 3I Atlas. The patterns are too perfect to be ignored. It arrives 8,000 years ago, just as humanity begins to record history. It enters the solar system on the ecliptic plane, blending in with the local traffic. It performs a flyby of our planets. It hides its most active phase, its perihelion, behind the sun, exactly when the Earth is blinded. And when it finally reveals itself to our sensors, it is camouflaged as a comet, yet it refuses to die like one. The skeptics ask, where is the extraordinary evidence? I say to them, the evidence is in the timing. The evidence is in the survival. The evidence is in the silence of the agencies that hold the high-resolution data. We are currently in the final window of opportunity. It is late November. The object is moving away from us. On the 19th of December, 2025, 3I Atlas will make its closest approach to Earth. It will be roughly 170 million miles away. This is our last chance. After this, it heads back into the dark. It will leave our solar system, never to return. And if we let it go without daring to look it in the eye, without daring to point our best instruments at it and ask the hard questions, we will have failed as a scientific species. NASA tells you it is a case of pareidolia, that we are seeing faces in the clouds. They say we are reading intention into random events. But let me tell you what is truly unsettling. Usually, in science, the more data we collect, the clearer the picture becomes. If you study a rock, eventually you know it is a rock. If you study a bacteria, eventually you understand its biology. But with 3I Atlas, the opposite is happening. Every new piece of data makes the picture more ambiguous, not less. It is acting in the gray zone. It is behaving exactly on the line between natural and artificial. It is showing us just enough comet-like behavior to give the skeptics an excuse to look away, but just enough artificial behavior to make the open-minded lose sleep at night. This ambiguity is not an accident. It is a design feature. If you want to observe a wildlife sanctuary, you do not land a helicopter in the middle of the herd. You send a drone that looks like a hummingbird. You stay quiet. You maintain plausible deniability. The most disturbing realization is not that the government might be hiding aliens. It is that the government might not know any more than we do, and they are too afraid to admit it. They are looking at the same blurry white dot. They are looking at the same impossible trajectory. And they are choosing safety over truth. They are choosing to tell you it is a snowball because the alternative, that a probe from an ancient civilization just completed a scan of our defenses, is too terrifying to put in a press release. We must build our own instruments. This is why I founded the Galileo Project. We cannot rely on data that is filtered through national security protocols. We cannot rely on agencies that are paralyzed by the fear of ridicule. We need to look at the sky with open eyes. We need to build telescopes that are not looking for the expected. We need algorithms that are not trained to ignore anomalies. We need a scientific community that is willing to risk its reputation for the sake of discovery, because the universe is not waiting for us to be ready. The universe is teeming with life. It is teeming with history. We are the new kids on the block. We are the ones sitting in the sandbox, arguing about whether the adult walking past the fence is real. 3I Atlas is leaving. It has seen what it came to see. It has tasted our solar wind. It has listened to our radio broadcasts. It has mapped our planets. And now it is reporting back. The question is not, are we alone? The question is, are we being judged? As we approach the 19th of December, do not let the official silence discourage you. Look at the data. Look at the coincidences. Look at the timeline. If this object survives its journey back into the interstellar night, if it maintains its structure, if it accelerates without a tail, then we have our answer. We have had our first contact. It was not a handshake. It was not a war. It was a scan. And now they know we are here. The window is closing. The visitor is departing. But the lesson remains. We must dare to look. Because the next time they send a messenger, it might not be just to look. It might be to say hello.